Thanks for the introduction. I'm not going to comment on why I was recruited to PlasticsEurope. I'm definitely a novelty in the sense that I don't have a background in the plastic industry. So my career now is amongst professionals in plastics, which is a great experience. And what I bring in, as already explained, is my background from not only public administration, but from the Danish Environment Department, and also in Brussels, where I was Environment Councillor at the Permanent Danish Representation. And that was actually the reason why I was not able to join you yesterday, and my apologies for that, not being here to celebrate your 10th anniversary, because I had to attend a meeting with the Nordic EU permanent reps, discussing together with some members of the European Parliament the coming European Union strategy on plastics. And this is indeed also the topic of my presentation here today. I've left out the word resource efficiency, not because it's not important. On the contrary, it's a cornerstone in the circular economy, and I will touch upon this, but that was more or less for practical reasons because there was no room for it on this first slide. So, but just a few words maybe on PlasticsEurope. I don't know how familiar you are with it, even though you are members of the plastic family, most of you at least. But PlasticsEurope is a pan-European trade body, trade association, and we have our headquarters in Brussels with some 30 people working there. And then we have 5 regional centers. One of them in London, which I'm heading, covering also Ireland, the Nordics, and the Baltics. So I have the responsibility of the northern part of Europe. And then we have regional headquarters or regional centers in Frankfurt, Milan, Paris, and Madrid as well. So altogether, we are about 60 people working to represent the European plastic raw material suppliers, just to put us in the context of a value chain. So we are the first step in the value chain, with a very close cooperation though with the rest of the chain, converters and brand owners and what have you. I just escaped Brussels yesterday, just before the latest terrorist attack, which took place in the central station. So luckily no one suffered from that, except from the attacker who was shot dead. I read this morning. But again, saying I'm happy to be here, not only because of that, but I could have been missing my plane, and it's not that easy to get to this part of Norway. But it's wonderful to be here. I'm a hiking man myself. I've been to Norway several times, to some of your national parks, and I love it. So this part I've never been to, but I may go here. I can see there are good opportunities for sailing in the fjords. So, okay, I'm not going to waste time more on this. I will see what I can provide you of information that you don't have already. I think the process around a strategy on plastics, I think you may not be that familiar with that, because it's extremely political. And what we do in PlasticsEurope, to a very large extent, is dictated by the current discussions in Brussels, the current discussions in capitals. If we take the UK, there is, well, now maybe not a good example, because over the last 18 months, as you know, I think policymakers have had their attention on other issues, really. But the issue of a circular economy is not that new. And it's high on the political agenda, and marine litter in particular. And I thought the last presentation here was a good bridge to my presentation, because we are faced with global challenges and the need to find solutions without necessarily transferring one solution from a global level to a European level. Because I think that we in Europe, in most cases, have the infrastructure in place. In most cases, we have the consciousness among our citizens, but there is still a lot to do. And I believe that, well, don't want to fight about numbers, but what we've been told is about 80% of the plastics that ends up in the oceans originates from the eastern part of this globe. So we are doing what we can in Europe to fight the issues, but we need also to take into account the global perspectives. I just whoa, this is the one. Yes, I don't think I need to explain more to you why we need a transformation from a linear economy to a circular economy. This has been explained already, and I think we all read newspapers, so we know about the background of a growing population and a higher living age expectation, and the pressure it puts on a finite pool of resources. So therefore, what we need is to deliver a more optimal use of resources at all stages of a product's life cycle. And the product life cycle is also a term that I will get back to over the next 15 minutes or so. But this is not an easy task, and you see that from the discussions in Brussels. There are lots of good ideas, which is good, but we need to find, solutions that can also be implemented. Some of it will need to be implemented from a regulatory point of view. Others will be implemented through action plans, maybe. Right now, we've reached the point where Council and Parliament are discussing a possible compromise on the legislative package related to the circular economy, including higher recycling targets, which today is a modest 22.5% for plastics, and where the Commission has proposed a 55%, and the Parliament is suggesting 60%. And now the Council says 30%. 30%. This is for tactical reasons, I'm sure, but it tells you that there are some tense discussions going on right now between Council and Parliament. And that's why it's not an easy task to transform the economy from what we know now to what is believed to be a circular economy. It's not only about increasing recycling targets, it's about closing the loop. And that's why we need to be prepared to challenge black and white thinking, what is good and bad, and what is sustainable and what is unsustainable. So what do we mean by a circular economy? If you look at the European Commission, they define the circular economy as maintaining the value of product, material, and resources in the economy for as long as possible while minimizing waste generation. When we listen to the Commission and NGOs and other stakeholders from time to time, you get the feeling, we get the feeling, we could be paranoid, but still, we get the feeling that most of the weight, most of the energy is focused on the last part of this sentence, minimizing the waste generation, being focused on the recycling, and less on the need for a low carbon and resource efficient economy. So that's one of the key messages that I would like to give you here, that a circular economy is more than just recycling. You know this, I can tell from all the interesting presentations. It's also about a low carbon and a resource efficient economy. But is there a role for plastics in the circular economy? Would it be necessary for me to ask this question to this audience? I don't think so. But still, if you talk to your families, if you talk to your friends, if you read your newspapers, you would get in doubt, because some people would say plastics are cheap, so they have no added value. Plastics are unrecyclable, so they cannot be circular, and so forth. All these statements that we have heard about before. But is this an accurate and complete picture, do you think? It's a rhetorical question. Of course it's not. I could ask in a different way. Are there sustainability challenges associated with plastics that we need to continue to do more to address? Absolutely. Would we be better placed to achieve a circular economy without plastics? Absolutely not. So this is why we, as an industry, welcome the Commission's intention to come up with a strategy on plastics in the circular economy, and of course we are happy to contribute to that. So what do you mean by plastics? Again, I shouldn't be asking this audience about a question like that, but still it's very important, because there is no one size that fits all approaches to a circular economy. So if we want to achieve meaningful solutions, we cannot simply talk generically about plastics. So in reality, we are talking about products, and different types of plastics are used in different types of products, as you see illustrated here. Isolating plastics that make our homes more energy efficient, plastic packaging films that protects and preserves food and goods, and so forth. The question, however, is how to make these products even more resource efficient and to address specific challenges related to them, like littering and waste. So how would we suggest to approach plastics in the circular economy? In a circular economy, I would even argue that with the present economic system, it's not that different, but leave that aside. I think this circle well illustrates the idea behind a circular economy. So in a circular economy, a product goes through different phases, of course, from feedstock to product manufacturing to use and post-use. And this is where the full life cycle thinking is important, and the question how plastics can contribute to resource efficiency at each stage of the circular economy. In our view, solutions to the challenges that we are facing with plastics need to be based on this general overview of the different stages of the life cycle of a product, and innovations need to be tailor-made based on that general overview. I'm very conscious about the time. I started 5 minutes past 12, so in principle I have about 15 minutes left.
Well observed.
Good. So if we look at the, and I know this is so basic that I'm probably boring you about this, but if you take the production phase, and why I'm showing, just a small comment, why I'm showing you this is also to give you an impression about the environment that we work in as PlasticsEurope. We do a lot in advocacy and communication, of course. A good deal of our staff are good scientists and have backgrounds like yourselves, I would believe. And that's why these discussions are so interesting, and to bring it out to people who would not necessarily know anything about plastics. If you take the members of the European Parliament, no prejudices whatsoever. Some of them that I meet with are extremely engaged, very emotional, and have very good ideas, but with less, maybe just a lacking understanding of how things can actually be implemented to do the job in a modern society as the one that we have, as the one that I think most of us would like to continue to have, although we may be prepared to behave and live perhaps a little bit different. But there are situations where, and this is where all the challenges boils up now, where shortcuts are being proposed by European Parliament. Shortcuts meaning, well, if we have an issue with plastic bags, let's ban them. I know even at a global level with Erik Solheim from UN Environment is campaigning now for banning plastic bags. But if you travel around the world, of course, you see a lot of plastic bags. Well, it's straightforward, isn't it? Just, ban it. Even though plastic bags, of course, as we know, have multiple purposes, not just hanging in the trees, but some would actually use it for other things. But you see the same mechanism around in Europe. Ban the one-way items, the cutleries in France. And again, with the present discussions, Council and Parliament, there are member states who would like to have the possibility of restricting single-use items, which is amazing since 1992 we've been within the internal market, and hopefully we will continue to be able to trade across borders with the same rulings and not having one big market in Europe that puts specific restrictions on certain types of products. But this is really boiling up for the time being, and much of it is influenced by the discussions around marine litter, I'm sure. But again, back to the production phase. Basically, if you want to increase resource efficiency, there are two aspects. The first one is the diversification of feedstock, and I think we've had several presentations around that subject. The other one is, the second one is environmental management systems. I was not here yesterday, but I'm not sure you spent much time on this, but there certainly is a way forward also by driving optimal operational and energy efficiency at the production level. However, if you turn to the use phase, this is where you typically find the most important part of a product's life when it comes to the overall benefits and the impact. If you take, as an example, the plastic insulation materials, that product ends up saving 250 times more energy than what it takes to produce them. I know this is just focusing on energy as one criteria, and perhaps also looking at a non-controversial use of plastics. But if we look at plastics which are, let's say, more controversial or more criticized, like packaging, consumer goods, different studies have shown that the overall environmental costs of using plastics is 4 times lower than if plastics were not used. And of course, there are references behind these statements that I come with here. If you have an interest to look into this, go to the PlasticsEurope website, and you will find our views on a coming European strategy on plastics, and you will see these references made. In this case, it's an Austrian think tank called Denkstadt. Some of you will know that, and TrueCost, an American consultancy. This highlights again the importance of looking at resource efficiency of the whole system around an end product and not just one product. If you take, as an example, as you can see on the slide here also, meat packaging. Here you have innovative, multi-layered food packaging, which can extend a steak's shelf life by 10 days, which results in 50% less spoilage and waste. So while optimizing the packaging production process is, of course, important, it is the food prevention food waste prevention qualities of the packaging where the real environmental benefit is seen. Continuing with this example of production of meat, it is in general a highly resource-intensive process, of course. But with this example, this is a shirling steak. The savings from avoiding food waste by improving the protective properties of the packaging are much greater than the savings from optimizing the packaging as production footprint. 70% for this one. And this is where this is therefore important to recognize again, and this is the second key message I wanted to deliver, that it is the type of packed product and its production and consumption patterns that govern the life cycle, resource efficiency, rather than only the plastic materials used to make the packaging. The question is, however, whether these use phase benefits matter if we don't have a sustainable solution for these products at the next phase in the circle, when it comes to the end of life. Well, some plastic products can be reused or repaired, and others can be mechanically or chemically recycled. In some cases, however, and at the moment, it is simply more resource efficient to recover products, certain products, as energy, as recycling them would cost even more energy. So we need to focus on what is the most resource efficient solution today, while continuing to invest in innovation for the future. So if you take the meat example again, for the moment the recycling options are limited for this type of packaging, the multi-layered packaging, plastic packaging. But does that mean that we would be better off using recyclable packaging or no packaging at all? These are questions that when you produce the material and keep the life cycle phases in mind, you need to keep that in mind when you calculate where and how much the total environmental footprint would be with one solution instead of another. But it might be the intuitive reaction that, well, why not use a recyclable packaging? But if we look at the facts, they tell a different story. So no packaging at all would lead to considerable wastage of food and emissions. And food waste prevention is a big issue, at least at European Union level. On the other hand, replacing the packaging with recyclable but less effective alternatives would also lead to an increase in emission. That's why today, as we look at it from a resource-efficient point of view, the best solution is clearly to use the multi-layer plastic packaging film and recover its energy at end of life. But does that mean that we just accept the status quo? And remember, I talk within a framework of a future strategy on plastics. So it's not just a matter of today or tomorrow. No, this would not mean that we should accept the status quo. This is where investments in innovations comes in. So recycling solutions are currently being researched with opportunities to recycle this particular packaging for further uses as well. But we haven't reached the level where this can actually be taken on board. So what is the our bit for a strategy to get the best out of plastics in a circular economy? Our vision is based on three guiding principles. The first one, of course, but I should mention it, is that no matter the raw material sources, plastics, of course, need to be safe for the application they're used in. And that means conducting risk assessment throughout the life cycle of a product. Secondly, for our industry, the key thing is to get the best out of plastics in the circular economy is a full life cycle thinking. I think I've delivered that message already. But that means designing for resource efficiency. Not the plastics themselves, but the whole product during the different phases of the circle. And this is where the Commission, the European Commission, sometimes, well, the communication is good and the cooperation is going well. But this is where we need to spend a little more time from time to time saying, well, yeah, plastics, all right, but plastics applications, yes. This is where you can actually do a big difference, because plastics are not just one material. It's a family of different types of materials, and it's used in I don't know how many different applications. So if you are looking for solutions for these specific sectors, you have to look at the products and not the material as such. And that's the trick in designing for resource efficiency. But it's also about designing products, of course, with end of life and litter prevention in mind. And all this boils down to what you've been talking about today and presumably also yesterday, innovations. Innovations made by, from and with plastics account for many of the advances that society is benefiting from today and will benefit from tomorrow. And no one would deny it. When you speak to the MEPs I mentioned before, when you speak to the NGOs, well, maybe not the NGOs, but at least the MEPs, members of European Parliament, they don't question the benefits of plastics as such. They simply don't want to see the littering. They don't want to see the plastic waste littered. They don't want to see the plastics in the oceans. So although we would need still to argue for the benefits of plastics, we really need to look at what is called the externalities and see to find solutions to that. So that would also be part of a future strategy. But the third guiding principle is that we need to work together to raise awareness and stimulate behavioral change, because it has a lot to do with behavioral change. There are lots of campaigns going on in the UK. There are lots of campaignings also going on in Norway and elsewhere. And I think it's like, well, you know, if you ask people, do you vote for that particular party, which may be one of those that, well, nobody really wants to play with? People would say, no, I don't. And same with littering. People wouldn't admit that they are littering. And what is littering? Is it just when you lose a small paper from your pocket or something like that? Yes, it is. If you drop your cigarette butts around in the street, yes, it is. So there are lots of behavioral changes, I think, which is relevant to most of us. And this is where working together is definitely necessary. So finally, our recommendations, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I would recommend that you, even though it's the most important part of what I'm saying here, I would recommend that you go to PlasticsEurope's website and read our views on a Plasticse future, an European Union plastic strategy. But really, it's quickly done because there are three headlines in our recommendation. The first one is promoting innovation, and it's kind of just summing up what I've just been saying. Promoting innovation, and we suggest that we can do our part, of course, the plastic industry, but policymakers can and should also do their part. From our part, it's issues like increasing durability and lifespan of finished goods. That fits well with the circular economy, I think. But also further developing and enhancing all forms of recycling, mechanical feedstock recycling, increasing the use of byproducts and waste streams, including carbon dioxide, as we heard. So there is a lot of actions that we as an industry would take within the framework of a strategy on plastics. Nobody really talked about what is the horizon of this strategy, but let's say it's 10 years, which I think is a reasonable period for a strategy. And I think you will see life and society very different in 10 years' time. And if you look just 10 years back, you will see the difference. So of course there will be a significant development over the next 10 years as well. And that would also go on the innovations and technologies within the plastics world. So on the policy makers' side, what we could suggest is, which I think is pretty modest, is to ask them to support the efforts to promote innovations. Could be to create a level playing field to avoid global market distortion and unfair competition. That's an issue in a time where global trade agreements are maybe not that popular, but still there needs to be a level playing field. Mobilizing public funding is another example, such as Horizon 2020, to stimulate innovation in plastics, feedstock recycling, and activities like that. And also to help secure and enable competitive access to raw materials. The second part is tackling end-of-life challenges. I haven't mentioned this, but would be great if you knew about it already, that we have, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, been calling for a ban on the landfilling of plastic waste, which is recyclable or recoverable. So, ban the landfilling of waste. And we believe that would create an impetus to boost the recycling business around in Europe, create jobs and growth and what have you. So that's a whole presentation to be done on that. But we're close to that with the present discussions going around a 10% max of landfilling, which of course is questioned by some member states because it's about infrastructure and it's about investments of billions of euros. So when you come to the point where decisions are to be taken by policymakers, the tone often gets a different sound. But I'm sure we will end up at around a maximum of 10%, and for some countries to have a transition period. So it will not only be the UK who would get a transition period at some point. Lots of other EU member states will have a transition period, but on more internal matters like the landfilling of waste. Separate collection is equally important, we think. Also here we are facing resistance from some member states, difficult to understand. But this again has to do with to make it easier to collect and sort and recycle. So that is also very important. And then to engage, and I need to say this, I know I've taken 5 more minutes that I should, engaging in activities to prevent plastics, marine litter at European and global level. I have already commented on that, so I wouldn't say much more than we are, over the last 4 years, we've had what is called the World Plastic Council, which has the benefit to a European association that it can actually reach out on a global level. So we are now, through the World Plastic Council, reaching out on a global level in order to find solutions to the issues around marine litter, not only in Europe, but around the globe. And then we have, this I also wanted to mention, that's important, if you haven't heard about it, the Operation Clean Sweep, meaning this is the one point where the raw material producers can actually control what is going on. It's on their own production plans. So the Operation Clean Sweep is good housekeeping, meaning don't leak the pellets. So do what is necessary to contain the pellets. It's not too much to ask, I think. Just like in your own homes, you don't leak the flour, you don't leak whatever, then you pick it up again, sweep it up again. And this is also, with this program, the intention for, or the demand for companies with production plants, that if they drop some pellets, sweep it up and make sure that the drains and things like that is fit, not to have the pellets leak to the environment. Policymakers, again, well, if they could adopt our thinking of using life cycle thinking and resource efficiency, I think that's great. They use the terms, but as I said, their focus seems to be on another place. And again, the zero plastics to landfill. And the strengthening and collaboration and dialogue. I'm not going any further because I've taken 7 minutes of your lunchtime, I'm afraid. But again, the cooperation and dialogue is extremely important. And I think we have a good tradition in the Nordics, in Norway, in Denmark, in Sweden, well, at least Denmark and Norway. But also in Britain, I think, that we, you know, the dialogue and the discussions with authorities, governments, well, it's pretty easy. And we simply need that. We don't need all the bureaucratic barriers and the long way to call a desk officer or whatever it might be. So the dialogue is extremely important if we are to meet the requirements of a circular economy. Thank you very much.